Today's program is part of a new series that Northeastern has launched. We kicked off the speaker series in September here. It's called Local Leaders, Global Impact, where we find someone in the community, a local leader who has really had a global impact, and pair them with one of our faculty out of the Boston campus to have a dialogue about things that have worked on a local level, on a global level, lessons learned, and really get into some thoughtful conversation about what can we learn from each other in carrying the city forward. So I am pleased today to announce that we have two local leaders with global impact joining us. First, let me introduce Dan Gregory. Dan Gregory just literally landed a few hours ago from Boston, leads our Idea Center, which is a venture accelerator program out of the DeMoore McKim College of Business, and also that's our student-run program, and then also co-leads our Center for Entrepreneurship Education and is on faculty. So Dan also has had an extensive tenure in the digital media space, and so will bring some of his perspective on technology infusion in the entrepreneurship space. And I think everyone in the room knows Dave Jones. If you don't, you probably have not been reading a lot of articles in our local paper for the last couple of years. CEO and president of Peak 10 Managed Data Services, Charlotte Business Person of the Year in 2010, avid runner, overall great guy, and I think one of those people that the Charlotte community looks to when we think of somebody who took an idea, put all of the right ingredients together and made it successful. And
I told Cheryl not to talk to my mother, but you
know I'm a big champion. Long time. And then I think all of you know Eric via the newspaper photos that he has out there with the Charlotte Business Journal, Eric Spanberg, who has agreed to serve as our moderator for this series. So I am not going to take any more time other than to turn it over to Eric and say thanks to both Dan and Dave. Appreciate your time
Pleasure.
today.
Nice to be here.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thanks to our panelists. This is a perfect topic. Somebody was already making jokes about the presidential debates, but it being campaign season, obviously there's so much talk about rebuilding economies and jobs, and inevitably you hear candidates and everyone else talking about entrepreneurs. How do we create jobs? And these two gentlemen are going to talk to us a little bit about that. They don't have to necessarily take a partisan stand, but they can give us some good information.
I've already voted. So
there you go.
Dave's
We're safe.
the president, and I'm the candidate, right? I mean the aspirant.
So everybody will be nice, unlike in the debates, and we'll see what we can come up with here. So I'm going to start out asking these guys some questions, and then after we have a little bit of conversation, hopefully y'all will ask some questions, which will be better than mine. I know they will. But we're going to start with David, and since you have built this data center business, it's grown even during the recession. Maybe you can just start by talking a little bit about what inspired you and helped you as you built this business, particularly as you went through difficult economic times.
Well, I guess, the inspiration, I always make a joke of that and said I didn't have a job, so I had to do something. But early on, back in 99, 2000, I was in a consulting practice, and I was helping companies. It was really marketing and management. But my background had been in telephony, so I understood networks, I understood the technology that was emerging. And what I believed from having been in a startup long-distance company back in those days and served a very similar market, I believed that businesses would care where their critical infrastructure was, that we were just getting started, and I was helping them build an internet plan, which they had no clue exactly what they were doing. I had probably less clue, but I understood the concepts and how to put it together, and help them with the network side of things, and not really on the application. We still stay that way. We're very infrastructure focused as a company. And my CFO affectionately says the only thing I got right in the financial plan was that it was a local business. So, but it's very
mastered from day one.
Yeah. So to me, and we built this company on relationship, on building the right relationships internally and externally, and that's what I understood. And as we started out, this sounds a little like rather trite, but what I wanted to do was to build a company that was based on a certain vision I had, but also created an environment that I could develop people. And not that I knew that I could do it, but my experience, past experience, said that I could put teams together that could work together. And frankly, I had been in a consulting practice for about 2 years, and I was an operator, and I knew that's what I needed to do. And there were several people, some mentors at that point in time, and they said, you know, in fact, I was on a panel with Shape Charlotte, which is a great emerging group of young people, young and old people, who are trying to figure out what they want to do with themselves in terms of, and I said, you know, what I realized was I had been in a consulting practice. I had never been in an environment where I had to eat what I killed. And it's a little bit rough to say that, but that's really what it boiled down to. And I said, you know, I'm going to do this. And if I fail, I know that I can go back and I can do these other things and I can survive. And you have to realize, you have to take that leap. So the inspiration for me was, this is really where my passion is. And if for some reason I really screw this up, I still have something I can go back to and start over. So I had never done that before. And my career had been with GTE, which was a big telephone utility, Virginia State Corporation Commission, which is, you know, government, and then went into a startup long distance business, ended up at MCI, large bureaucratic business that I hated, and then realized that I really needed to be doing something on my own. It's a long story, but
and so as you got into this, you clearly wanted to make that leap, but can you talk a little bit about the leap of faith that goes with that in terms of, you know, all the worries and headaches that are the price of admission, so to speak, of running your own show?
Well, you know, when I was first year at the University of Virginia, second year I went through Hell Week, and I tried to forget all that. It's kind of, in a way, it's a little similar, but you really, you know, for me, I really believed that we could be successful at this, and that was the drive for me. And yeah, there were times when I wasn't sure we'd make payroll. There were times when my CFO and I looked at each other and said, you know, we got more money in our own bank account than we have in this business. But ultimately, what gave us hope was we realized with this business has a very high capital intensity. I mean, every data center back then we built was $3.5 to $4 million, and I said, you know, that's a lot of money. Today, it's twice that to build a data center. So early on, as this industry was emerging, the private equity firms and investment banking firms, they clamored because they saw that we were going into markets that no one else was penetrating. Mm-hmm. And that encouraged me enough to take the money when we got the money in 2000. The funny thing was, in 2001, we raised $18.5 million at a time that the dot-com bubble had burst, and no one was investing. In fact, there was another group that invested in us, and he's sitting right there, Gene Bodycott, who, if it hadn't been for him, we probably wouldn't be where we are in Charlotte today, because he took a ticket on us. He just said, I believe these guys. And today, Gene, we probably lease close to 80,000 square feet out there. Yeah, so it's one of those things that I guess he realized that we had a passion for what we were doing. We weren't jumping off the deep end with things. We're very conservative in how we went about the business. But that was enough to get us started, and we were scared to death. Yeah, we were. So.
And Dan, I'm sure you've heard from people who've started businesses or want to start businesses similar sentiments about the fear, the trepidation, but I'm curious what the prevailing sentiment is right now, given that the economy is so much more difficult, access to capital, we hear that phrase all the time. So what kinds of things are you hearing from entrepreneurs and prospective entrepreneurs?
Well, so I deal with younger entrepreneurs, not
about 2 years
younger. Not younger than Dave, but younger in their age than relative to others. And so some of them are students, others of them are young alums. And this leap of faith, which I can remember taking as a young person when I went from a large corporation to a small corporation, isn't an option. It is a survival skill that young people have to have today. So we use Northeastern, we use the relatively safe confines of a university to provide the kind of structure that an emerging venture and an emerging entrepreneur needs. And so we tend to see ventures that are not hugely capital intensive, although we have a lab to venture program where a lot of biotech companies come through IDEA, and those are extremely capital intensive. But we see, particularly in the digital media area, very low, they're referred to as capital efficient ventures. And so the challenge is not so much access to capital, but differentiation in the market. The challenge is taking entrepreneurs who are all passionate about the product or service that they're developing and get them to understand that they're about to collide with something called the market, in which there are equally smart people with virtually identical products and services. So we spend a lot of time taking these very literate, technology literate young people and helping them understand what it takes to get into that marketplace, to differentiate yourself, and to stand out in the crowd. When I was in the 80s, I worked for a very large direct marketing company that used to compile the yellow pages, and they had an internal group of people. They got every yellow page from around the country, and they raced in a manual process to get it online and mailed to these small businesses, was the target market. And literally it was a room half the size of this floor filled with people transcribing. There were no scanners, et cetera. This is the 80s. Now, if you don't know search engine optimization as an emerging venture, so that it's a worldwide market for anything, and if you can't kind of rise to the top and differentiate your product and be a player in the market, you're lost. But getting back to your original question, the plunge, which is so exciting, and particularly when it works out well, is something that we're seeing as an essential life skill for young people today.
You know, to that plunge and successful, and that was one of the things that, again, go back to that Shape Charlotte group. I said, you guys realize if you start your own business, you never fail.
That's right.
You may not make it.
Right. No, I totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah. That was another reason I think we were successful, is my partner and I both had been successful, but we'd also fail. Right. And we'd said, well, dust myself off. Right. And go back.
Yeah. And in fact, that's where I was going next. Is I was hoping both of you could talk a little bit about. You always hear how important failure is in terms of learning, and very few people step out and do everything correctly the first time. So whether you call it failure or successful failure, can you just talk a little bit about the importance of that in terms of figuring out where you're going as an entrepreneur? Have you ever failed at anything?
Yeah, I failed at a few things. Where I failed wasn't that I didn't deliver results. Where I failed was not understanding the relationship between the guy I reported to, basically the chairman of the company, and myself. And there were some issues that I was uncomfortable with that I let interfere with the relationship with him. And people that have heard me talk know that one of the most important things that I've learned is managing up. And I can translate that now into so many things and even to a young entrepreneur, to realize you always have a boss. Yep. You always have someone you're working for. And if you don't understand the pressures they have, you will never be successful. And even if you don't like them, that's where you are. You know, wherever you go, that's where you are. And you have to be able to boil that down. It's hard. It's really hard. I didn't get it. I let a personal feeling interfere. And one of us was going to leave, and he was the chairman. So, but even today, as I look at the board that I report to, I make it a point, because I know in private equity firms, every Monday they have a portfolio meeting. So every Friday or on the weekend, I message my chairman, and I said, "Is there anything you need to know?" he's used to that now. At first, he said, "Why are you asking me that?" And I said, "Because I know you got a meeting Monday or Tuesday, and you're going to get asked questions because you went and spent too much money for this company, and they're going to want to know how's it going. And I'm here to give you whatever information you need." Probably to them, it was one of the most important things that I did. To me, that's a survival instinct, because I realized about 8 months after I got through the anguish of why did this happen to me, and I was pretty depressed, I will tell you. But I came through that, and I said, this really wasn't his fault. It was my fault.
Right.
And once I got there, it really changed the whole dynamic. And ever since when we started the company, I've always followed. I may not agree, but I have to step back and say, I work for those guys, ultimately.
Right.
And I use that, to take it even further, that's a message I deliver inside the company. And I'll tell the lowest paid employee that you have an obligation to manage up. And I'll tell that manager, it's not about just managing those 15 people that work for you. If you're not managing up, then that tells me something. Number one, it tells me the wrong place, but number two, it tells me this is how it translates to me. You don't understand the vision of the company. And so that's really, it was a huge traumatic lesson for me, because I ended up having to move totally from Alabama, which may not be so bad, but Alabama to Georgia, and ultimately to North Carolina as a result. But where we are today, as I look back, a number of the people I worked with back then it's very flattering. They says we always knew that if you ever started your own company, it would be an awesome place to work. So it's a huge compliment.
So Dan, I'm sure now when you deal with people that are almost as young as David, it might be hard to convince them of the importance of the lesson that he just outlined.
No, it's actually very easy, we have these ventures that are hard at work at technologies, and we focus them on the fact that it's a little bit like the product market dichotomy that I talked about. The product is kind of the easy part. The technology is the easy part. The buzzwords around technology, that's trivial, because there's always going to be someone that understands that and can put it together. But it's the interrelationship of people in these companies that make a huge difference. And the way that we deal with failure, I personally preach life cycle. And what do I mean by that? I mean that absolutely everything has a life cycle. Things start slowly and haltingly, and then they accelerate, and then they level off. And the trick to sustaining any business is figuring out the innovation as the growth phase moves into a kind of a flattening, and to create a new growth phase. And ideas have life cycles, products have life cycles, industries have life cycles, companies have life cycles. And so if you focus it on that, people say, okay, this idea that I have has a life cycle. And if it doesn't start to accelerate like that, you got to tweak it. You have all of it's sort of a dashboard that you have in front of you. And if you can't get it to move up, then you got to iterate and come back and start again. And people and with friends and family investing, it's critical. But it's a different kind of a relationship than a professional investor. But people have to get used to the idea that that the money that is coming in is risk capital. There's a good investor behind it is going to assess the risk of this venture, and they're going to make their own judgment. And as long as you're an honest person and express what you're trying to do and where you are in that work, that if things don't work out, there's going to be some unhappiness certainly, but that's the game that both players are in. So we try to rationalize this failure so it moves away from the horror that we all feel as entrepreneurs. And I spent 25 years starting companies and before I got into academia, and so I know the sickness that you feel in making a payroll and the drain on cash and the investors that aren't committing and all of that. I mean, it's really scary, but We get them young, and we get them as part of an educational program. We have something called the Center for Entrepreneurship Education that actually integrates classroom and experiential learning together. So IDEA is kind of this big lab where people can bring their ventures. And then we have a set of classrooms, a class programming that are geared to undergraduate, graduate, faculty, and alumni. And they can come through. Not all of the pieces are built yet, but the idea is that there's a system of entrepreneurship. We were talking about your real estate business, and I was struck. I can't read from this distance, and my memory for names are poor, so I apologize.
It's the same as yours.
But excuse me?
It's the same as yours.
There you go.
Oh, Dan.
We're just messing with you.
Thank you for the hint.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Dan, that Dan.
No, but there's a system for learning while you're still relatively young and in the relative safety of university or the early stages of your career. And this is the time, that's the age at which to really learn, you know, for people to learn through experience, but then learn, you know, through classroom that they will survive a failure, is the bottom line.
David, you were nodding your head when he mentioned the family piece, and that dynamic often figures into startups. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, there are two things that Dan brought up that I had to smile about. One was that because when we started out, it was a lot of friends and family. We raised about, in 2 rounds in 2000, we raised a little under $6 million. Now understand, that was enough for us to start building 2 data centers. And then one was in Jacksonville and the other one was here. And some of those investors, when we talked to them, I said, if you can't, the old message, if you can't throw that check in the trash can, don't give it to me. That's the risk you're taking. Right. And then I did have some family investors as well. Fortunately, right now they're distant family because they were never happy. That they expected never to see a failure. And our investors stayed in for 10 years.
Right.
And so there are a lot of my private equity investors stayed for 10 years. So a lot of the others said, the smart ones said, write it off. You know. So when they finally got paid out when we sold in 2010, there were some happy people. Of course, some of them I said, where do you want me to, you don't want me to send this to your wife, do you? Kind of thing. But anyway, it does, for us, we had 60 investors initially. And it was, it always bothered me because I felt like, how much can I tell them? How much can I not tell them? As opposed to where we are today with my private equity investors, it was always, whatever you want to know, I'll tell you, because that was the managing upside of it. They couldn't have no surprises. Right. The other thing you said, which I really related to when you said there were cycles, I have a different term for that. What we have seen in our company is brick walls, where we got to a point where we said, oh crap, we're going to hit the wall. So we had to change. In fact, we're on the 3rd dramatic change of that right now, and looking at our back office systems and realizing that we have run so hard that we had this provisioning system that rather than stepping back and say we need to replace the whole system, we said, okay, we'll add this to it, we'll add this to it. And we suddenly realized that it's way too manual. And my concern was we're hurting our customers by doing this. So it was always that piece, but that's also what makes it very hard for an entrepreneur, because as you hit those cycles or those walls, the guy who started the business can't always adapt to the next phase of growth for the company. I compliment myself in a way because I've been able to do that in our company, but it's, I guess, because I never really said, you know, it'll always be this way. Right. I've always had to say, how do we make it better? And that's
it's a wonderful feeling to avoid that brick wall.
It's better than the alternative, that's for sure.
Yeah. But that it's true innovation. You know, you think of the innovation as the original idea, but innovation happens constantly through the life of a company, and you always have to be on your toes for it. And when you see it and you respond to it and you're successful, it's incredibly satisfying.
Well, one thing I wondered about, you mentioned earlier, was there will always be somebody that can navigate what's going on, such as the digital media, which I know you've dealt with a little bit. But at the same time, I would like to hear some of your thoughts, because I think any of us that go to a lot of business panel discussions, digital media, social media, Facebook, Twitter, all these things are just sort of thrown out. but there are very rarely any kind of specifics or strategy or detail to them. And I'm just wondering, how often do you think people are falling prey to just following the herd rather than having a distinct strategy when you get into that realm?
I can tell you my thoughts on it. I've seen in our business, we've seen a lot of influences come in from different sets of digital media and different ways communication. I look at it as communication, is how do you improve that. But what the impact of that to me internally, first off, is making sure that we use digital media in a way that presents the right image and message for the company. So it's about the company first from my perspective and how we deploy that. And we use Facebook and Twitter and a bunch of other things, but it's very controlled in a way because my customers tend to be, they don't want necessarily people to know where they are. We have things called cybersecurity and all those sorts of things that can play into that. And but to me, the more important thing with that is making sure what has happened, if you look at it, is so often the mistakes people are making is they're not thinking. Right. They respond, and I'm probably one of the worst when it comes to email. I get an email, and I'm got a passion to answer that email. Most people know that, and they said, I don't see how you can respond so fast. But in digital media, if you look at all of the bad things that have happened, it's because, I hate to use this term, but somebody was really stupid. They didn't step back. Even though there's so many more venues and avenues now that, from my perspective and trying to protect our company, I always tell her, slow down. Don't move too fast, because there are a lot of inferences can be made if you're not careful in how you deploy and employ digital media. Ours is really being more today than it ever has been built around our brand and making sure that digital media does the right things to show that we're a secure place for people to go to. We have high business integrity, those sorts of things. And I always have said in a lot of things in business, if moving too fast can get you in more trouble than moving too slow. Not always the case, but that's the way we've looked at digital media, because again, you have to be engaged in it. You have to be internally engaged, and we use AMER and other forms of communications to make sure. I have people stretched over 7 states, 10 cities, and they need to collaborate. And you can really use digital media tools, platforms, in a collaborative fashion that can really get you a lot of results. For example, we had engineers that were trying to architect solutions across the footprint, and I asked them how they were doing it one day, and they said, well, we're using IM, and then we're using SharePoint, and I said, wait a minute, you got 2 different processes going on here. And so that's when we had AMER came up, which was license free at that point in time. What I wanted them to do was create an environment where they could create directories of information, because I'm dragging you all into way into details, but when we architect a customer solution, and almost every customer I have has to have a specific design. It's not sold over the internet, it's actually architected. We have to have a depository or a directory of that information, because it is repeatable in some respects. Right. But they were losing that because they were so intent on using social media to communicate, they weren't creating an audit trail that they could retrieve the information. Right. And so we've gone, that's just an example, gone that route to do.
So I think that people get in trouble when they ignore the potential impact of digital media on their business. That's one way to get in trouble. Yeah. The other way to get in trouble is when they think that they have to architect the solution themselves. And I would bet that you've met some new people as you've adapted the technology to your business. So I think it's a process of adaptation, adaptation, I should say, and that often this is a license for young people to get involved in the work of more mature businesses. They actually bring tremendous value into the setting. And so I think you can't fight that, and so when you and I go to these conferences and they're explaining how to use AMER in your customer-facing relationships, I think that seeking expertise from other disciplines, it becomes a multidisciplinary solution, is really critical, because we can't keep up on top of it, and there are always experts within each one of these technologies. So it's not to be ignored. That's where dinosaurs die. But it's also not to be, it's not necessarily our skill set. Our skill set is bringing knowledge about the business that we run and the customer that we have. I mean, it really does all revolve around the customer. It's not technology, it's that interface with this thing called the market that's critical.
To some degree, I've had to look at it from a generational standpoint, because I have millennials, I have Ys, I have X's, I have people like me, and you know that you have to provide them the tools that they're comfortable with using. One of the things that I've always put the heat on our marketing and product development side is if you can't understand what's happening with iPhones and iPads and the customer interface to that, then we're going to miss something in our company, because that's eventually filters down into business, and how businesses want to interrelate. It just has to pervade that. And for us to, if we don't, I profess that we don't, is to sit back and say, well, I don't need to worry about that. That's the worst thing my product marketing, product development management people can say is, we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah,
oh, yes.
exactly.
Because then you're out of step with your customers. Getting back to sort of the core issue of starting businesses, fostering entrepreneurs, I think sometimes the conversation breaks down when people are leery or suspicious of the ability of the public sector and also educational colleges and universities to play a role in that. You obviously both have sort of real world experience. Can you talk about some of the ways you think that collaboration can be effective? In other words, do you need all three legs of the stool to really get the most bang for your buck?
I think that there are three important things that government can do, and that's support education, and support education. Because that education has to be current and realistic. You know, our model is that it includes experiential education. All of our undergraduates spend 3 6-month periods of time during their undergraduate years working for companies. And so without education, and education not for young people, but education for older people who need to you know, try to keep up with the radical changes that are going on. So I think education is the biggest thing, and needs to be invested in. On a local level, I think space is tremendously important. You know, there are many privately run incubators. If government could help support that real estate investment that brings people together in collaborative spaces, and the most successful ones we've seen are just wide open spaces where there are clusters of desks with ventures, and you watch the ventures interact with one another, and a health sciences company is helping an apparel company in some odd way. You know, so government could have a role in that, and certainly in Massachusetts we are so tangled with regulation around formation and you know, just staying on top of the paperwork. It's very difficult. So those are three things. One of them is three things itself. But
David, you've delved into this a little bit yourself here of late with trying to create more people like yourself. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, you know, another trite thing I sort of profess to do, that when you've started a business and you've reached a point where the business is very successful, I feel like you have an obligation to give back, and I use the terms that you earn, you learn, and you return, or you learn, you earn, and return in that sequence, because you don't earn before you learn. But I think it's important for business leaders to cultivate that environment wherever they are, if they're in Charlotte or whatever the market is. I do think, Cheryl and I talked to this outside, I do think from an education standpoint, ideally, we have really smart people in the company, and my ideal guy or lady is really smart and can have my personality. So, so I don't have both of those. I'm kidding, but what we find so often is some of the smartest technologists in the company often can't carry on, what I'm going to say, can't carry on a conversation with empathy with a customer. Because typically when a customer calls in with a problem, you know what it's like. I can't get on well, this doesn't happen to us, but for you, it happened to me the other night. I couldn't get my email to work, and I was pissed. But it wasn't my company, it was AT&T, so nothing I could do about it. But to have the empathy that you have to have and guide a customer, in our case a business customer, back to where they need to be to understand that we're going to solve this problem, so just settle down. But it's been age old ever since we started the business, because we don't have call centers, we have operations centers, and that's been the biggest challenge. And in fact, I'm on the advisory board of one of the schools here, and it was funny, we were talking about curriculum. It was a graduate business school, and I said, what you're missing here is you don't have a course on human capital. You've got it on raising money and accounting and all marketing, but where's the importance of human capital? Because I will tell you, in our case, probably one of the best things that ever happened to us, besides from the fact they paid a lot of money for the company, was Welsh Carson. And they came large, they managed $20 billion, and you would think, and you hear all kinds of things about them as ruthless, et cetera. The first day, they said, the three most important people to us in your company are you, your CFO, and your HR VP. Yeah. And I didn't have one. But they understand human capital is what drives companies. And as I began to look around, particularly at this school, I said, you really need to be focusing on that, because that is going to make the difference as we move forward. As much as technology is doing, it's still about people.
Yeah, I anecdote about me, and I think it's more a value than an aptitude. But when I was in business school, in the second year of business school, I was in entrepreneurial studies, and actually my team won the venture idea for the class, and so I went tearing into the professor's office, expecting him to pat me on the back, and which he did in a way, but I said, so this is what we did. What do you think I should do professionally? And he said, HR. And I was offended. I was offended. It was sort of like, what I can do the financial, I can do the marketing, I can do all these things. I understand the product that we sold, but HR. And really, the reason I'm enjoying I have the best job in the world, because I work with just hundreds of young people who are trying to start stuff. My passion is all around the people, and getting people to understand that from an early age is so important. It gets disguised when the buzzwords fly and the technology is there's huge capital involved, et cetera. But if you're pissing your chairman off, seriously, right? It doesn't matter. It's really interesting.
One other thing I want to cover, particularly given where we are today, Northeastern, it was a big story when Northeastern came here. Johnson & Wales has come in recent years. UNC Charlotte has opened an uptown campus. And I'd like to hear both of your opinions. Yours from a Boston perspective, since so much of the success of the Boston economy is that concentration of higher education and those advanced degrees. Yeah. And David, if you can talk from what you're seeing locally, and what you still think we need. So.
Yeah, there's not any one thing. When you think of Johnson Wales, Northeastern, and some of the other things that are happening, I look at that and saying, all these things are good for Charlotte, because what it creates is the warm feeling for me is an environment where there's a vibrance. There's things beginning to happen, and there's not any one is a silo. They're all interrelated at some point in time. It's hard for me to say exactly where, but and to think that Queens or Northeastern or UNCC or CCPC would try to do things like this as opposed to trying to collaborate to do it is just so wrong, and they're not. I mean, they are working together, and that's the only way I see Charlotte continuing to thrive and grow, because that's where you're going to find out where the real needs are, and not every one of those can meet every need. So you have to determine what are they best at. All of the technology, and every one of those, and all the businesses have technology undergirding everything they do, whether it's through the media side of things or wherever. So I'm encouraged by that, and I'm really glad to have Northeastern here, because what I see is the ability. I mean, we're a very busy bunch of people. We don't have time to say, well, I'm going to take 6 months off and go back to school. But when there are outlets for the types of training and education we need, that's one of the things that's hurt higher education in Charlotte and everywhere is the economy. Because it was at one point businesses would, take care of the training, if you will, put their employees into different programs, whether it was an MBA, executive MBA, or particularly those areas of higher. And they're saying, well, we got to really control up cost. So to be able to get that education in pieces, if you will, where you can select and choose the best courses that are going to work for you, I'm encouraged by that, because we're only going to be as good as the education we have here. And there's a whole nother issue around secondary and all that, which fortunately I'm past that right now. I don't have to worry about that piece of it.
Dan, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But that's what I see, and it's kind of a vague answer, but I don't think you look at one. I think you look at the whole movement. And maybe Charlotte needs to do a little bit more about what is happening in the educational opportunities in the city, because that's going to drive, when the Chamber attracts a company here, I know they talk about that, but if Northeastern and Queens and UNCC, they're not pushing to do that. And I was involved with UNCC at one point, and I said, they wanted to understand why they weren't engaged with more businesses in Charlotte. And I said, because nobody knows what you do. It's about marketing. And so anyway, they've changed that. They've gone after it. But anyway, that's kind of the way
Dan, what can we learn from Boston?
I think that what the educational institutions in Boston fosters more than brain power, which is important but is sort of recognized, is the diversity that comes out of that. And innovation is really driven by diverse minds coming together and creating something of value. So whether it's engineering or marketing or health sciences or computer sciences or whatever, you need all of those people in a learning mode, and then they need to be stimulated in some system to start engaging in commerce in some fashion, and that's where the community needs to. I think that the university's primary business is to educate students. So I'm going to play a little bit counter to what Dave said. And yes, they should market to businesses, because that's where their students should end up. And so they need to help. But the businesses, and particularly people like Dave and the incubators, need to back up to the shipping dock of the universities and actually engage. My father was an early venture capitalist in Boston, and he infiltrated Harvard and MIT and walked through the labs to find people with interesting ideas, because there wasn't the venture industry at that point. Now there's not plenty of capital, but there's capital there, and the universities are sort of have sidewalk sales of what's going on in the university. So the connection needs to be made between the university and the outside world, and the connection that we find really helpful is bringing alumni back who have built businesses to work as mentors with these ventures. And so starting mentoring programs and offering those mentoring programs to universities might be a good idea if they don't have them. Because these young people don't know what they don't know. and they're pretty sure that they have, and the shape of future products and services are in the minds of 20-year-olds right now. They're not in our minds. And so what needs to happen is the intersection of the experience of someone who's built a tremendous company going to help individuals recognize how that is done. And that interaction is very powerful, and it needs to happen at the institutional level as well. So I think Boston prospers because of the diversity of ideas that are coming out of its universities. But it can be replicated anywhere.
Let's take a few questions from the audience. Who's got the $1 million question?
This is a $2 million question.
I like it, double or nothing.
Do I get a percentage if I answer it right?
Actually, I have a couple of questions. I've had some friends over the years that, let's say, they're just regular people, and the light goes off, and they've gone from throwing a frisbee to a dog and chatting to having 10,000 employees, and a couple of people come to me and said, I found what I want to do for the rest of my life. And the light just went off. If you deal with a lot of people, have you seen patterns where the node points where things come together and somebody says, wow, is there such a thing as that, or is there an individual with everybody?
So where they get the spark and they see what they must do. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, or they say, I can do this.
Yeah, yeah.
I get it. I can do this, and I'm gonna, and they continue to build and grow, and suddenly they've got this wonderful thing they're doing.
Right. No, I think that it often happens, but it doesn't always happen with the last piece, which is it ends up being a company of 10,000 people. But I am seeing tremendous energy around ideas, and then as those ideas grow and more people get involved with those ideas, people really fasten on them and commit to them. But I'm not sure I'm getting at what you're asking.
Are there any pathways? Are there any points where certain things come together where somebody gets an idea and you've seen it happen over and over again? Is there any pattern? Maybe that's what I'm asking.
I have a tough time answering that. It has in my life, but I'm a very passionate person. When I get excited about something, I really dig in. I also can move from one thing to the next thing and feel equal passion. So I think that's a personality type. If you are, I'm struggling with this question.
I think one thing, well, a couple things my thinking about it is, fortunately, Dan was trying to answer it, and I could sit here and think for a while. I think there are entrepreneurs out there that are serial entrepreneurs. It doesn't really matter, and I hate to stereotype it, it doesn't really matter what it is. They just have a business mind, and they can create a new dog food over here, or they can build an airplane company over here. That's strange. It's somewhat like the blind squirrel, Gene, I think, in that there are some people that all of a sudden they find that niche. And I'd say I'm one. I think I found something that I really enjoy. People ask me, not to just talk about me, but after Welsh Carson bought us, for even today, people have said, so what are you doing now? And I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing that I'm not doing? And I said, I'm still running the company. He said, well, did you have a contract? I said, no. I said, listen, when we did this deal, I asked our team what they wanted to do, and they said they wanted to continue running. They like what we're doing, and they want to continue to build a company. And I said, I'm happy. My challenges are a lot different, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now than where I am. And it only took me 25 years to find it, but I do think there are people that fall right into it. I don't know whether it's divine grace or what causes it, But I think there are also others who are just as happy creating 10 different companies
Yeah.
and doing that. That's their passion.
I have to counsel people. They walk into my office and they say, I'm working with five ventures. I said, you just described a problem. You got to narrow it down to one and really work on it.
Do well.
But there is a mindset, a personality type, and I actually am one of these people where I'm constantly thinking, well, maybe I should get into the data center business. That sounds kind of cool.
Have a checkbook and you can.
You know, you know, I've always had a profound sense that we're only on this earth for a certain period of time, and I want to experience as much as possible, learn as much as possible. I love building things. I hate ambiguity, but I love ambiguity because I can get rid of ambiguity if there is ambiguity, if you follow that. And, you know,
Well, ambiguous to me.
it is ambiguous. I like trying to build something concrete out of something that is mushy. But then when it's built, you know, and people start saying what are quarterly results, and you know, I don't think of this as this is the thing that I want to do for the rest of my life. I get restless. So,
Can I ask one more question?
yeah,
Somebody else might have.
someone always know how to answer it.
I've read a bunch of books recently on innovation. One of them is Stephen Johnson, Where Good Ideas Come From. And one of the people that he quotes in there, I forget the fellow's name, but he talks about this theory called the adjacent possible. And that to me is just fascinating.
No, that's
Incredible that there's something going along and all it takes is a few things and it all works.
right.
And do you
I subscribe to that wholly. It's what we were talking about, walls and cycles and stuff. It happens within a company. It happens starting new companies.
Happened to rain today. Oh, good. That's why it happened. I mean, I believe that. I believe that.
But the adjacent possibility is that you see parallel opportunities that
And the
can
one you're
enhance
focused on.
what you're
Yeah.
doing, and it's not just jumping tracks.
do you teach your students to look for that?
My students teach me, yes, I do. To answer that seriously, I do precious. I am a Cheryl. Don't repeat this. I am a faux academic because I've spent my life building companies, and I was lucky enough to find Northeastern that valued that experience, and they said, "Come run these incubators." So there are 2 incubators here, and what I have to do is keep teams moving forward and keep teams seeing the possibilities. And I do that mostly through questioning, and they deliver the answers as opposed to the typical professor that has the answers and lectures. And so smart people, given a few questions that lead to the adjacent ideas or the next idea that will accelerate growth. They're the ones that have to find it out. It's tremendous. It's tremendously exciting.
Let's get 1 or 2 more before I turn it over to Cheryl, if we have 1 or 2 more. Anyone?
How have you seen the modes of continuing education evolve over the years?
Continuing education meaning sort of lifelong learning. Again, I'm not a lifelong academic, but I see a lot of people, particularly around technology, and I'm going to now sound like I'm contradicting myself. Earlier I said you don't need to know everything, but you have to know the boundaries. So I think that a lifelong learner is a tremendously important thing in this. I do teach 1 class in which I get up in front of people, and my favorite class is to go from hunter-gatherers to 2011, and we are going through such a profound change in our economy, in our society, driven by technology. And we all see it, the way people work, the way people are motivated to work, the kind of incentives they use. They're distributed around the world, yet they're working for 1 company. This is not easy to deal with if you're over the age of 40. And so it forces people into a mode where they have to learn. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and at Northeastern I don't do any of this work, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for what I would say just-in-time education for people who are maturing.
I remember the cavemen had the Facebook likes for the wheel and fire. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask one more question. I've read that when you're collaborating in terms of solving a problem, being able to having a system where you can have multiple inputs, one on top of the other, I was just wondering, is very helpful. I was wondering if you've seen that with the AMER you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I'm not advertising for Yammer, but because there are a lot of
similar systems.
Yeah, there are a lot of platforms out there, and this just happened to be one that one of my engineers started using, and it just went, just took off. And the thing about it that I enjoy is, because I'm subscribed to it, is I can go in and I can see what they're talking about. Some of it I don't understand, but because a lot of our engineers get in, they start talking about this version of this particular software, what have you, or application. But to see how it builds on itself, and for me to sort of work through that, it is so valuable to me to see who, not only what they're talking about, but who's weighing in. Because it is all across our company. It's not just the engineers. It's guys and ladies that I said, well, I didn't realize they knew anything about that. So it is tremendous. And I've been one that have really fanned that fire and trying to keep it going. In fact, we looked at having a customized platform for the whole company. It was a little premature. What I realized is we needed to back up and really be able to swim in it well before we built the pool, if you will. So, but it's been very valuable.
So that's an internal system.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant to say when I said diversity. I wasn't talking about racial, ethnic, cultural diversity. I was talking about just different minds addressing a problem. Nobody has the key to it all anymore. It may never have been the case, but it's certainly not the case now. So you have to have systems. You have to develop systems, and I sit in the hotbed of them in a university, where just these crazy ideas come together. The story of IDEA, we've worked with over a couple hundred quote-unquote ventures. Now, many of these are really early stage, and you wouldn't consider them ventures. But they're starting to get very, very serious. We started within the business school, and we're pushing it out now so that it's a university resource. In the first 20 ventures, probably 95% of those ventures came from the business school. Now, I think the number is 36% of the entrepreneurs are from the business school, and all the rest are from all the other disciplines. You can't put together a competitive product, build a competitive market with like-minded people. You have to force diverse ways of thinking of problems. It's just too complicated, too fast-moving. You need people. You need the receptionists who see certain things in their interaction with a customer, talking to the systems people that are building the CRM. All of these people have to, and you have to have the voice of the customer in there as well. It's really critical, and the great thing is that the technology facilitates it. It can get out of hand and overused, but theoretically, the technology allows for this discourse where before such was impossible.
The environment changes rapidly. One of the biggest things people ask me, what keeps me asleep at night, keeps me awake at night. Freudian.
You're tired.
Freudian. What keeps me awake at night, it used to be if we have a power failure. That was the thing that was just unbelievable. But the thing that really keeps me awake more now is our company's grown. We're 330 people. And what I've begun to see is the culture we've had as a company. And some of it's because of social media and other things. In fact, I was with one of our office marketing coordinators in Nashville last night, and she said something to me like, well, because she took care of everything for this event we were there for, and she said, I probably stepped over the line in trying to get this or that done. And I said, Penny, it's that attitude that I'm afraid that we're seeing less of in the company.
Yeah.
That I see a number of people who are not realizing that they can do whatever they want to do. They don't have to stay in this silo, I'll use that word, and it really is bothering me. And I've really gotten, I didn't come up with this, but in our last call, I said, guys, you need to understand, I have a mindset of constructive discontent.
Yeah.
Now, that came from the chairman of Coca-Cola, and everybody kind of looked at me and said, do you understand what that means? And I said, I'm never going to be satisfied. And if you're sitting there happy with what you're doing and don't want to do anything else, that's great. But you need to have constructive discontent, because it's the only way you grow. And the tools, whether they're technology or digital tools, what have you, it does get to that to me. And I didn't mean to diverse off that question, but I wanted to make sure that, to me, what I see, that's what excites me about the company, is the challenges are so different now. And I fight hard to make sure that we keep that culture that says we're entrepreneurs. And I hate to see people in there saying, well, I didn't know I could do that. And I said, why can't you do that?
See, you own you own, in a literal sense, no, I guess you sold your company, but you drove the creation of the company, but the reason it was successful is you were smart enough to give ownership to everybody.
Yeah, we push it. Yep, push it
and I'm not even talking about equity. I'm talking about step over the line, Penny. You're not going to get in trouble.
Yeah, it's about rights and responsibility.
Right. It's so cool.
That is a great way to close, I think. Let's thank these two gentlemen for their insights. Over to the boss.
Yeah, no, this, truly, this has been one of the most fun conversations that I've sat in a long time. And I think part of it is just, you both are just so authentic, and you can see the passion that you have for entrepreneurship and for helping the next generation of entrepreneurs. But you're fun, you're well balanced. I know, Dave, you say you're not the smartest, but you balance the smarts with the humility. You just don't see it's the smarts with the humility. And I have to say, Dan, you are not a faux faculty member, because every faculty member that I have met at Northeastern, particularly those who teach here in Charlotte, truly are that scholar practitioner. Many of them 20 years of previous business experience or some industry experience that has now translated into the classroom. And that's what makes it more rich and valuable for our students. So I'd like to ask all of you to join me in thanking Dave and Dan and Eric for moderating. Our appreciation. We will continue this series in November, and interestingly enough, our topic is on family business planning and succession planning when you're in a family business. So it's a nice dovetail to, so now you've had this innovative idea, sparked a company. Now, how do you go and pass it off? And Ron Norelli, who is the CEO of Norelli & Company, who also happens to be an alum from the university, will be our Northeastern, or our local leader. And then Kimberly Edelston, who's on faculty in our College of Business, will be coming down for that. So I invite you to come back.